Marcus Townsend thought he'd seen everything in his 15 years as a bodyguard. But the moment he saw the name carved into that weathered gravestone, he realized some secrets are buried for a reason, and some are meant to destroy everything. Before we begin the story, comment below with the city you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. Marcus Townsend had protected diplomats, celebrities, and billionaires across 3 continents. At 42, he'd mastered the art of becoming invisible, always present, never noticed, observing everything while revealing nothing. His military background had taught him discipline, and 12 years in private security had taught him discretion. He never asked questions, he never got involved, he simply did his job. That philosophy had served him well until the day Richard Ashford hired him. Richard Ashford was one of those names that appeared in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal with predictable regularity. CEO of Ashford Industries, a manufacturing empire worth billions, Richard had built his fortune through ruthless efficiency and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate market trends. At 65, he showed no signs of slowing down. His silver hair was always perfectly styled, his suits handmade in London, his presence commanding respect the moment he entered a room. The assignment seemed straightforward. Marcus was to serve as personal security for Richard's daughter, Victoria Ashford, during her extended stay in Boston while Richard handled business overseas. The pay was exceptional, triple Marcus's usual rate, and Richard made it clear he expected perfection. "My daughter is everything to me," Richard had said during their first meeting in his corner office overlooking downtown Boston. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mahogany desk between them. "Her safety is non-negotiable. You'll accompany her everywhere. You'll maintain professional distance, but constant vigilance." And Marcus, he'd leaned forward, his grey eyes sharp as steel. "You'll never discuss what you see or hear. Ever. Is that understood?" "Completely, sir," Marcus had replied. What Richard didn't mention was why his 28-year-old daughter needed constant protection, or why she'd left her position as VP of Operations at Ashford Industries to spend 6 months in Boston. Marcus knew better than to ask. He met Victoria Ashford on a Monday morning in September. The Ashford estate sat on 12 acres in Dover, one of Boston's most exclusive suburbs. The main house was a colonial revival masterpiece, all white columns and black shutters, surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns that rolled down toward a private pond. Marcus arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, as instructed. A housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, elderly and efficient, led him through marble hallways adorned with original artwork to a sun-drenched breakfast room overlooking the gardens. That's where he first saw her. Victoria Ashford sat at the far end of a long table, an untouched cup of coffee cooling beside her laptop. She wore jeans and a simple grey sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry, except for a thin silver watch. She looked nothing like the polished professional Marcus had seen in the corporate photos Richard had provided. She looked up as he entered, and Marcus was struck by her eyes, the same penetrating grey as her father's, but softer, carrying a weight that seemed at odds with her privileged background. "Miss Ashford, I'm Marcus Townsend," he said, maintaining a respectful distance. "Your father has hired me to ensure your safety during your time here." "I know why you're here," she interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. She closed her laptop and stood. "My father thinks I need protection. I think I need privacy. We're going to have a problem if you can't understand the difference." Marcus had dealt with resistant clients before. "I'll be as unobtrusive as possible, Miss Ashford. You won't even know I'm there." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "That's what they all say, until I try to do something they don't approve of, and suddenly they're making phone calls to my father." She picked up her coffee cup, finally taking a sip, then grimaced at the cold liquid. "Let me be clear, Mr. Townsend. I'm not in danger. I'm not reckless. I don't need a shadow. But since my father insists, and since you're already here, let's establish some ground rules. I'm listening. You can follow me. You can watch the doors and windows and whatever else security people watch. But you don't ask me questions. You don't report my activities to my father, and you absolutely don't interfere with my personal life. Deal? It was the exact opposite of what Richard had instructed, but Marcus recognized a battle he couldn't win. Deal. She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. Finally, she nodded. I have an appointment in an hour. We'll see how good you are at being invisible. That first week set the pattern. Victoria maintained a sparse schedule. Morning coffee alone, afternoons spent on her laptop in various rooms of the estate, occasional trips into Boston for meetings Marcus wasn't privy to. She was polite, but distant, treating him like an expensive piece of furniture her father had insisted on buying. Marcus observed everything. He noted that she rarely ate, that she took calls she never answered in his presence, that she spent long periods staring out windows with an expression he couldn't quite read. Sadness, yes, but something else too. Guilt, maybe, or fear. On the 8th day, she did something different. It was Thursday morning, unseasonably warm for late September. Victoria came downstairs dressed in dark jeans, a black jacket, and carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. Their sweet fragrance filled the foyer. I'm going out, she said simply. Of course, Miss Ashford. Where? You don't ask questions, remember? She headed toward the garage, where a sleek black Mercedes waited. Marcus followed, slipping into the driver's seat before she could protest. If you're going somewhere, I drive. That's non-negotiable. For a moment, he thought she might argue. Then she sighed and climbed into the back seat. Fine. Head toward Newton. They drove in silence through Dover's winding roads, past estates hidden behind stone walls and ancient trees just beginning to show hints of autumn colour. Marcus kept his eyes on the road and the mirrors, noting traffic patterns, potential threats, escape routes, the constant calculations that had become second nature. Turn left here. They entered Newton Cemetery just after 9 a.m. The old graveyard sprawled across gentle hills, its weathered headstones and monuments dating back to the 1700s. Oak trees provided shade, their leaves rustling in the warm breeze. The place had a peaceful quality, untouched by the modern world just beyond its iron gates. Wait in the car, she said, as Marcus pulled into the small parking area. Miss Ashford, this is personal, Mr. Townsend. I need you to wait here. Her tone left no room for argument. Marcus watched as she walked into the cemetery, the white lilies bright against her dark clothing. She moved with purpose, following a path that suggested she'd made this journey before. Many times before. He waited 5 minutes, then 10, 15. Against his better judgment, he got out of the car. This was exactly the kind of vulnerability security professionals feared. A client alone in an isolated location, hidden by trees and tombstones, countless angles of approach for anyone with ill intent. Richard Ashford had been adamant about constant vigilance. Personal space be damned. Marcus moved quietly along the path Victoria had taken, his trained eyes scanning for threats while tracking her location. He found her deep in the cemetery's older section, kneeling before a simple granite headstone beneath an ancient oak tree. He stayed back, hidden behind a larger monument, watching. This was a violation of the privacy she'd demanded, but his job was her safety, not her comfort. Victoria placed the lilies at the base of the headstone. Her lips moved, speaking words Marcus couldn't hear. After a moment, she bowed her head, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. One hand reached out, fingers tracing the letters carved into the stone with a tenderness that made Marcus feel like an intruder. She stayed there for nearly 30 minutes. When she finally stood, she wiped her face, took a deep breath that seemed to cost her something, and walked back toward the parking lot. Marcus had returned to the car before she emerged from the trees. If she suspected he'd followed her, she didn't mention it. They drove back to the estate in silence, and she disappeared into her room for the rest of the day. But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. The raw grief on her face, the gentle way she'd touched that headstone, the weight of whatever secret that grave held. The next Thursday, she made the same journey. Same black clothing, same white lilies, same instruction to wait in the car. And the Thursday after that. And the one after that, it became routine. Every Thursday morning, 9 a.m., Newton Cemetery. Victoria would spend 30 minutes at that grave, then return to the car with red-rimmed eyes and a silence that lasted the rest of the day. Marcus never asked. He'd made a deal, and he kept his word. But the mystery gnawed at him. Who was buried there? Why did she visit every single week without fail? Why did grief that deep belong to someone so young? 6 weeks into his assignment, Marcus made a decision he knew he might regret. On a Tuesday afternoon, while Victoria was at a lunch meeting in Boston that he'd vetted and deemed secure, he drove back to Newton Cemetery alone. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves. Marcus parked in the same spot and followed the now familiar path through the older section. Finding the grave wasn't difficult. White lilies, slightly wilted from the week before, marked the location. Marcus approached slowly, his heart beating faster than he wanted to admit. He told himself this was due diligence, protecting his client by understanding what held such power over her. But he knew it was more than that. Curiosity. That dangerous, unprofessional impulse he'd spent 15 years suppressing. The headstone was simple grey granite, clean but worn by New England weather. No elaborate carvings or epitaphs. Just a name, 2 dates, and 3 words. Marcus read the inscription and felt his blood run cold. Victoria Ann Ashford, March 15th, 1995, August 7th, 2023. Forever in our hearts. He stared at the dates, his mind racing. Victoria Ashford was born March 15th, 1995. He'd seen her driver's license during the initial security briefing. There was no mistake. The woman he'd been protecting for 6 weeks was visiting her own grave. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Where are you? I need the car in 20 minutes. Marcus turned and walked back to his car, his professional composure barely intact. The drive back to Boston happened on autopilot. He picked up Victoria from her lunch meeting with a smile he didn't feel. She chatted casually about the meeting as they drove back to Dover, seeming more relaxed than usual. Marcus couldn't stop looking at her in the rearview mirror. She was alive, solid, real. But so was that grave. So were those dates. That night, Marcus broke into Richard Ashford's private study. The estate was quiet, Victoria asleep upstairs, the housekeeper retired to her quarters. Marcus knew the security system. He'd designed the protocols himself. Disabling the cameras in the study for 30 minutes was child's play. Richard's office was exactly what Marcus expected. Leather-bound books, expensive artwork, a desk that probably cost more than Marcus's car, and filing cabinets, old-fashioned physical files that men of Richard's generation still trusted more than digital storage. Marcus found what he was looking for in the third cabinet, a file labelled simply Victoria. Inside were medical records, therapy bills, prescriptions for medications Marcus recognized as antipsychotics and mood stabilizers, hospital admission forms from McLean Psychiatric Hospital, dated August 2023. Discharge papers marked against medical advice, letters from doctors warning that Victoria was a danger to herself and possibly others. Court documents related to a conservatorship hearing that Richard had apparently won, and photographs, dozens of them. Victoria, the Victoria Marcus had been protecting, in various states of distress. Dishevelled, hollow-eyed, clearly unwell. One photo showed her covered in blood, though the attached police report indicated the blood wasn't hers. The final document in the file was a death certificate, official, notarized, stamped with the seal of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Victoria Ann Ashford, died August 7th, 2023. Cause of death, suicide by overdose. The discharge papers and death certificate were dated the same day. A quick scan of additional documents revealed what Marcus hadn't wanted to believe. Victoria had an identical twin, Vivian Grace Ashford, born 12 minutes after Victoria. Photographs from their college years showed 2 young women who looked exactly alike. The file contained incident reports, psychiatric evaluations. Vivian had shown signs of mental illness in her mid-20s. schizoaffective disorder, treatment facilities, a final incident on August 7th, 2023, some kind of confrontation. Vivian had attacked Victoria. In the struggle, Vivian had died from head trauma. Victoria, traumatized, had been admitted to McLean. Vivian, dead at the hospital, had taken pills she'd been hiding. The official cause, overdose. But the headstone bore Victoria's name, not Vivian's. Richard had made a choice. Protect his surviving daughter by claiming Victoria had died, not Vivian. Let the troubled daughter disappear. Let the heir to Ashford Industries be mourned. Give Victoria, traumatized, guilt-ridden, her sister's identity to escape the scandal. Except Victoria couldn't escape. She visited that grave every Thursday, apologizing to a headstone that bore her own name. Marcus photographed the key documents, returned everything to the file, and slipped out just as footsteps approached. He made it back to his quarters without being seen. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Marcus watched her more carefully, looking for tells, inconsistencies. But she was just Victoria. Same mannerisms, same voice, same distant politeness. Grief had hollowed her out, but she was unmistakably real. Thursday came again. White lilies, black clothing, Newton Cemetery. This time, when she told him to wait in the car, Marcus didn't argue. He simply nodded. But he followed her anyway. Closer this time, close enough to hear. She knelt before the grave, placing the fresh lilies beside last week's wilted ones. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper. "Hey, Vic. I brought your favourites again." She paused, as if listening to a response only she could hear. "Dad's still overseas, still trying to fix everything from a distance. You know how he is. And yes, he hired another one. Marcus, he's different from the others. Quieter. Doesn't judge. I think you'd like him." Marcus's heart pounded. She was talking to herself. To her own grave. "I'm sorry." Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry for what I did. I know you're gone because of me. I know that every single day. That's why I come here. To remind myself. To make sure I never forget." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. Marcus wanted to go to her, to somehow comfort her, but he stood frozen behind his monument, feeling like he was watching something sacred and terrible. When she finally composed herself, she stood and placed one hand on the gravestone. "I'll see you next week. I promise. I'll never stop coming. It's the least I can do." Marcus barely made it back to the car before she did. During the drive home, he caught her watching him in the rearview mirror, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Townsend," she said suddenly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, Miss Ashford." "Do you think some sins are unforgivable?" The question hung in the air between them. Marcus chose his words carefully. "I think people punish themselves far more harshly than anyone else ever could." She was quiet for a long moment. "That's a politician's answer, but I suppose it's the best I can expect." They didn't speak for the rest of the drive. The next Thursday, Marcus drove her to the cemetery as usual. But this time, when she told him to wait in the car, he said, "I'd like to pay my respects too, if that's okay." Her breath caught. "What?" "To Vivian. I'd like to say goodbye to Vivian." The colour drained from her face. She stared at him for several heartbeats, her mouth slightly open. "You know." "I know. Your father won't hear it from me. That was never the deal." She closed her eyes, a single tear tracking down her cheek. When she opened them again, she nodded slowly. "Okay, okay." They walked to the grave together. Victoria placed her white lilies as always, but this time Marcus stood beside her instead of hiding behind monuments. He read the headstone with new eyes, seeing the lie and the love tangled together in those few carved words. "She was amazing," Victoria said suddenly. Her voice was rough with emotion, brilliant and funny and so full of life, until she got sick, until everything changed. She looked at Marcus. "I tried to help her. I really did." But she didn't know who I was anymore. She thought I was trying to steal her life, her identity. That night, she attacked me, screaming that I wasn't real, that I was an imposter. We fought, and she fell and hit her head and... Her voice broke. Marcus waited, letting her take the time she needed. The overdose was later, at the hospital, after they told her what she'd done, what we'd both done to each other. She couldn't live with it. She took pills she'd been hiding. And I was the one who found her. So technically the overdose did kill her, but I killed her first. I killed my sister, Mr. Townsend. We both died that night, in different ways. That's why you visit. She nodded. My father thought it would be easier if the world thought I died instead of her. Easier for the business, for the family name, for everything. He changed the headstone before the funeral, made it say my name instead of hers. Vivian was buried as Victoria, and Victoria became Vivian. Except I couldn't be Vivian. I could barely be myself. So I became this hollow thing that visits her own grave every week because it's the only way I can breathe. And the people who knew you had a twin? NDAs, settlements, sealed records. My father is very good at making problems disappear, including me. She gave a bitter laugh. I'm officially dead. All my friends, my colleagues, everyone I knew, they think I'm gone. And maybe I am. Maybe I died with her, and what's left is just going through the motions. Marcus wanted to tell her that wasn't true, that she was still here, still alive, still capable of healing. But he recognized the depth of her wound, knew that platitudes would only trivialize her pain. Does it help, coming here every week? She considered the question seriously. It's the only time I feel honest. The only time I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not. When I talk to her here, I can be Victoria. The real Victoria. The one who loved her sister and failed her and can't forgive herself. Everywhere else, I have to be Vivian. I have to wear my dead sister's name like a costume and pretend it fits. But you're not Vivian. No, I'm not. But I'm not the Victoria I used to be either. She died with Vivian. I don't know who I am anymore. They stood in silence, the autumn wind rustling the oak leaves above them. Finally, Marcus spoke. I think you're someone who loved her sister enough to carry her memory, even when it hurts. Someone strong enough to face what happened instead of running from it. And someone brave enough to visit this grave every single week, even though every visit is a reminder of the worst night of your life. She looked at him, surprised. You don't think I'm a monster. I think you're human. I think you made an impossible choice in an impossible situation, and you're still paying for it. But that doesn't make you a monster. It makes you someone who needs to forgive herself. I don't know if I can. Then maybe start with just trying. Maybe that's enough for now. She wiped her face and looked down at the grave. I wish you could meet her, Mr. Townsend, the real Vivian, before she got sick. You would have liked her better than me. I wouldn't have been assigned to protect her. I was assigned to you, and I'm glad I was. For the first time in the 6 weeks he'd known her, she gave him a genuine smile. Small, fragile, but real. Thank you for not running, for not telling my father, for everything. That's my job. No. Your job is to keep me safe from external threats. This is something else. Maybe. But maybe keeping you safe includes making sure you're okay on the inside too. They walked back to the car together. As Marcus drove them home through the cemetery gates, she spoke again. My father doesn't know I visit the grave. He thinks it would be too painful, too dangerous for my mental state. He thinks I'm in therapy, taking my medications, forgetting, moving on. She paused. Will you tell him? Marcus met her gaze in the rearview mirror. You made me promise not to report your activities to your father. Remember, a deal's a deal. Her smile grew a little stronger. Thank you, Marcus. It was the first time she'd called him by his first name. The weeks that followed brought a subtle shift in their relationship. She still maintained her privacy, still insisted on space and boundaries, but she was less guarded around Marcus. She'd make casual conversation during their drives, ask his opinion on matters that had nothing to do with security, even laugh occasionally at his dry observations about Boston traffic. The Thursday cemetery visits continued like clockwork, but now Marcus walked with her to the grave each time. He never intruded on her private conversations with Vivian, instead standing at a respectful distance, keeping watch. Not for threats from strangers, but offering a solid presence, someone to bear witness to her grief, to confirm that her pain was real and valid. On a cold November morning, as they stood beside Vivian's grave under grey skies that threatened snow, she said something that surprised him. "I used to be jealous of her, you know, before she got sick. Vivian was always the fun one, the brave one. She jumped out of planes and dated interesting people and said exactly what she thought. I was the careful one, the responsible one, the boring twin." She smiled sadly. "I used to wish I could be more like her, and then she got sick, and I would have given anything for her to be boring and safe if it meant she'd stay healthy. You're not boring. You're right, I'm traumatized. That's much more interesting." It was dark humor, but humor nonetheless. Marcus took it as a sign of healing, however incremental. Do you think she'd forgive me? If she was still here, still herself, do you think she'd understand why I survived and she didn't? Marcus thought about his own experiences with loss, with the guilt of survival that came from outliving comrades in combat. "I think Vivian loved you, and I think love doesn't end just because someone's gone. If she loved you the way you clearly loved her, then yes. She'd forgive you. She'd want you to forgive yourself." She was quiet for a long time. "That's a nice thought. I don't know if I believe it, but it's nice." As December approached, Richard Ashford returned from overseas. Marcus met with him in that same corner office where they'd first discussed the assignment 3 months earlier. The late afternoon sun cast familiar shadows, but the man across the desk looked older, more tired than Marcus remembered. "How is she?" Richard asked without preamble. Marcus chose his words carefully. "Quiet, keeps to herself, no incidents, no concerns from a security standpoint." "But," Richard prompted, reading between the lines, "she's grieving, Mr. Ashford. That's not a security issue, but it is an issue." Richard's jaw tightened. "I've provided her with the best therapist money can buy. I've given her space, privacy, a home where she's safe from judgment and questions. What more can I do? Let her grieve in her own way, even if it's not the way you'd choose." Richard studied him for a long moment. "You know about the cemetery visits." It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded. "I know. And you didn't tell me. She asked me not to report her activities unless they posed a safety risk. The cemetery doesn't. She's visiting a grave with her own name on it, Townsend. That's not healthy. With all due respect, sir, she's visiting her sister's grave. The name on the stone doesn't change that." Richard stood and walked to the window, his back to Marcus. The office felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion Marcus hadn't expected. "She blames herself for everything, for not recognizing how sick Vivian was, for the fight, for surviving. She thinks she killed her sister, when the truth is, Vivian was already lost long before that night." He turned back to Marcus. "The doctor said there was no coming back from what Vivian had. The delusions, the violence, the paranoia, it would have only gotten worse. What happened that night? It was tragic, but it was also inevitable. Does she know that? I've tried to tell her. She won't listen. She's decided this is her burden to carry, her punishment to endure, and I don't know how to help her." Richard returned to his desk, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. Changing the headstone was wrong. "I know that now. I thought I was protecting her, giving her a clean slate, but all I did was take away her right to grieve honestly. It's not too late to fix that." Richard met his gaze. "You think I should tell the truth? That Vivian is the one who died, not Victoria? Do you have any idea what that would mean? The questions, The investigations, the media circus. It would destroy everything I've built. Everything both my daughters worked for. I think she is already destroyed, sir. And no amount of money or power can fix that. Only truth can. The words hung in the air between them. Richard's hands clenched on his desk, and for a moment Marcus thought he might be fired on the spot. But then the older man simply nodded slowly. You're right. God help me. You're right. 2 weeks later, on a cold Thursday morning in mid-December, Marcus drove Victoria to Newton Cemetery as usual. But this time, Richard Ashford sat in the back seat beside his daughter. She had been surprised when her father asked to join her, but she hadn't refused. Now, as they walked together toward Vivian's grave, she glanced nervously at Richard, who carried his own bouquet of white lilies. At the grave, Victoria placed her flowers as she always did. Richard stood beside her, staring at the headstone with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Pain, certainly, regret, and something that might have been resolve. I was wrong, Richard said suddenly, his voice rough. About everything. About the headstone. About making you hide. About thinking I could protect you by erasing her. Dad, I'm going to fix the headstone. It should say Vivian's name. She deserves that. You deserve to grieve your sister honestly, without hiding who you are. But the business, the shareholders, everyone who thinks I'm dead, I don't care. I've spent a year protecting the wrong things. The company will survive the truth. Hell, it survived worse. But you won't survive another year of this, and I can't lose both my daughters. She collapsed against her father, sobbing. Richard held her tightly, his own face wet, his usual composure finally cracking. They stood there for a long time, father and daughter mourning together at last for the one they'd lost. Marcus turned away, giving them privacy, keeping watch over the surrounding cemetery. This was their moment, their healing. He was just the bodyguard who happened to witness it. But as he stood there, the winter sun breaking through the clouds to cast long shadows across the headstones, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope that sometimes broken things could be mended, that even the deepest wounds could begin to heal. It would take time. Richard would have to navigate the legal and social implications of revealing the truth. Victoria would have to learn how to live again as herself, to step out of her sister's shadow and her own grave. But they'd taken the first step. And sometimes, that was the hardest part. 6 months passed. Spring arrived in Boston with cherry blossoms and warm rain. Marcus had stayed on as Victoria's security, though the job had evolved into something closer to friendship. She still needed protection. Richard's revelation about Vivian's death had indeed caused a media storm, but she no longer needed someone to shield her from herself. The headstone at Newton Cemetery now bore the correct name, Vivian Grace Ashford. Below the dates was a new epitaph that Victoria had chosen. She danced in the rain and laughed at the thunder. She visited every Thursday still, but the crushing weight of guilt had lifted slightly. She could talk about Vivian now, the real Vivian before the illness, without breaking down. She could share memories and stories, keeping her sister alive in the only way that mattered. On a warm May afternoon, Victoria asked Marcus to join her for lunch at a small cafe near Boston Common. They sat outside, watching tourists and pigeons navigate the crowded park. "I've been thinking about going back to work," she said, stirring her iced coffee. "Not at Ashford Industries, somewhere new. Maybe non-profit work, something with mental health advocacy." "That sounds good. Vivian would like that." "Yeah, I think she would." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I'm also thinking about moving, getting my own place, not running away, just starting over. Properly this time." "Still in Boston?" "Probably. I like it here. And I'm not ready to leave Vivian yet. Maybe I never will be." She looked at him seriously. "The thing is, if I move, I won't need a full-time bodyguard living on the property. The media attention is dying down. Dad's accepted that I can take care of myself." Marcus had known this was coming. He'd been preparing for the end of this assignment, telling himself it was just another job completed. Another client who no longer needed him. But the thought of leaving her now felt different than any previous assignment had. I understand. But, she continued, I'd still like to have someone I trust looking out for me. Not 24/7, just someone who could check in, make sure I'm okay. Maybe join me for Thursday cemetery visits so I'm not talking to myself the whole time. She was looking at him with an expression that had learned to smile again. And Marcus realized she wasn't just asking him to continue as her bodyguard. She was asking him to be her friend. I think that could be arranged. Though I should warn you, my rates for friendship are much higher than my security rates. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh. I'll take my chances. They finished their coffee and walked through the common together. No longer guard and client, but two people who'd survived something terrible and found unexpected connection in the aftermath. The sun was warm on their faces, and for the first time in a long time, the future felt less like a burden and more like a possibility. That evening, Marcus stood alone at his apartment window, looking out over the city lights of Boston. He thought about Richard Ashford's question from months ago. Did he think some sins were unforgivable? He thought about Victoria visiting her sister's grave every Thursday, carrying guilt like a second skin. About Richard changing a headstone because he thought he could erase his daughter's pain. About Vivian, lost to an illness that had stolen her from herself long before that tragic night. And he realized the answer wasn't about forgiveness at all. It was about living with what couldn't be changed, about carrying loss without letting it crush you, about finding meaning in the spaces between grief and grace. Some things couldn't be forgiven because they couldn't be undone. But maybe, just maybe, they could be survived. And maybe survival was enough. Marcus picked up his phone and sent her a text. Same time next Thursday. Her response came a minute later. Wouldn't miss it. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. He smiled and set down his phone. Outside his window, Boston glittered in the darkness, full of secrets and stories and people trying their best to live with both. Somewhere in that sprawl, Victoria Ashford was doing the same, one Thursday at a time, one lily at a time, one small step at a time. And Marcus would be there, keeping watch. Not because it was his job anymore, but because some responsibilities transcend paychecks and contracts. Some promises are kept not because they're required, but because they're right. The next Thursday arrived wrapped in warm sunshine and the scent of fresh-cut grass. Marcus picked up Victoria at her new apartment in Back Bay, a cozy two-bedroom with a view of the Charles River that she'd furnished herself, choosing comfort over the sterile elegance of her father's estate. They drove to Newton Cemetery in comfortable silence, the radio playing softly. She held her usual bouquet of white lilies, but today she'd added blue irises. Vivian's second favourite flower, she'd explained. At the grave, as she knelt to arrange the flowers, she spoke to her sister as she always did. But this time, her words were different. I'm getting better, Viv. It's slow, but it's happening. I had coffee with a friend yesterday, someone I met through a mental health support group Dad found for me. She lost her brother to schizophrenia. We talked for 3 hours and it felt normal. Like maybe I can do this. Maybe I can live. She paused, touching the headstone. I'll never stop coming here. I'll never stop missing you. But I think I'm finally learning to miss you without hating myself. That's progress, right? Marcus stood at his usual respectful distance, watching the grounds more out of habit than necessity. A bird sang in the oak tree above them. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed. When she finished and stood, she looked at Marcus with clear eyes. Ready? Whenever you are. They walked back to the car together, and as Marcus drove them away from the cemetery, she said something that made his throat tighten. You know what Vivian would say if she could see me now? What's that? She'd tell me to stop being so dramatic and go live my damn life. A smile, but with tears in her eyes. She was always telling me that, even before she got sick. Stop worrying so much, Vic. Stop playing it safe. Just live. Sounds like good advice. Yeah, it really does. 3 months later, on a warm August afternoon, Victoria stood before a crowd of 50 people at a small community centre in Dorchester. It was the first official event for the foundation she'd launched, the Vivian G. Ashford Foundation for Mental Health Awareness. Seed money from her father, passion from Victoria, and a mission to help families dealing with serious mental illness before tragedy struck. Marcus stood at the back of the room, watching as she gave her speech. She talked about her sister without shame, about the illness that had taken her, about the signs they'd missed and the resources they'd lacked. She talked about the night Vivian died with an honesty that made the audience collectively hold their breath. "I can't bring my sister back," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her expression. "But I can make sure other families have better options than we did. I can make sure that when someone's sister or brother or child starts showing signs of mental illness, they know where to go. They know they're not alone. They know there's help." The crowd erupted in applause. Afterward, people lined up to talk to her, to share their own stories, to thank her for her bravery. She handled each person with grace and genuine empathy, and Marcus felt pride swell in his chest. This was who Victoria was when she wasn't buried under guilt. This was the woman Vivian would have been proud to call her sister. When the event finally ended and the crowd dispersed, she found Marcus waiting by his car. She was exhausted but glowing, her expression brighter than he'd seen them since they'd met. "That was incredible," Marcus said. "That was terrifying, but also good. Really good. I think Vivian would have liked it. I know she would have." They drove back toward Boston as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She was quiet, processing the day, and Marcus let her have the silence. After a while, she spoke. "I used to think the grave was the only place I could be honest about who I was. But today, standing in front of all those people, telling Vivian's story and my story, that was honest too. That was real. You're building something important. You're taking the worst thing that ever happened to you and turning it into something that will help thousands of people." Vivian always said I was too serious, too focused on doing the right thing. A smile crossed her face. Guess she was right. But maybe being serious isn't always bad. Maybe it's exactly what this work needs. Maybe you're exactly what this work needs. She met his gaze in the rearview mirror. "Thank you, Mark, for driving me to that cemetery week after week, for not judging me, for helping me find my way back to being me. You found your own way back. I just made sure you were safe while you did it. Still, I couldn't have done it without you." The months continued to pass. Fall arrived again, marking a full year since Marcus had first taken the assignment to protect Victoria Ashford. The leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and the air carried that particular New England crispness that promised winter would follow soon enough. Victoria's foundation grew steadily. She hired a small staff, secured grants and donations, and began offering support groups for families dealing with serious mental illness. Local news ran stories about her work. The foundation's website got thousands of visits each month. She was making a difference, one family at a time. The Thursday cemetery visits continued, but they were different now. Sometimes she would bring other people, friends from her support group, colleagues from the foundation, even her father occasionally. She was sharing Vivian with the world, refusing to let her sister become just a name on a stone. And each time, without fail, Marcus was there. Not because he was still technically her bodyguard. That arrangement had ended months ago. But because he'd made a promise. And because watching her heal had become more important to him than he wanted to admit. On the first anniversary of his assignment, Marcus met Richard Ashford for lunch at a steakhouse in downtown Boston. It was an unexpected invitation, but Marcus accepted. Over expensive cuts of beef and glasses of bourbon, Richard surprised him. "I wanted to thank you for what you did for my daughter. I hired you to keep her physically safe, but you gave her something more valuable. You gave her space to heal. She did the hard work herself. Maybe. But she needed someone to believe in her while she did it. Someone who wasn't her father, who didn't have decades of guilt and mistakes clouding their judgment." He paused, swirling his bourbon. "I've made a lot of choices I regret, Marcus, but hiring you wasn't one of them. I appreciate that, sir. Richard, I think we're past formalities at this point. He set down his glass and leaned forward. I have a question for you, and I want an honest answer. Are you in love with my daughter? Marcus froze, his own drink halfway to his lips. Of all the questions he'd expected, that wasn't one of them. Sir, Richard, I've never acted inappropriately. That's not what I asked. I asked if you're in love with her, because I've seen the way you look at her. I've seen how you show up every Thursday, how you check in on her, how you were at that foundation event last month, even though you had no professional obligation to be there. Marcus set down his glass carefully. He thought about lying, about maintaining professional distance. But Richard deserved honesty. I care about her, very much. But there's a line I won't cross. She's been through enough without having to navigate complicated feelings with someone who was supposed to protect her. What if she feels the same way? Does she? The question escaped before Marcus could stop it. Richard gave him a small smile. I'm not going to answer that, but I will tell you this. Victoria is an adult. She's been through hell and come out the other side. She doesn't need her father interfering in her personal life. If there's something between you two, that's for you to figure out. I just wanted you to know I wouldn't stand in the way. The conversation haunted Marcus for days. He'd been so careful to maintain boundaries, to be what Victoria needed, a friend, a support, someone she could trust without complications. But if Richard could see his feelings, could she? The next Thursday, as they drove to the cemetery, Marcus found himself hyper-aware of everything. The way she smiled at him, the casual way she touched his arm when making a point, the comfortable silence between them that spoke of deep familiarity. At the grave, she knelt as always, arranging her lilies. But today, she said something different. Viv, I need your advice. There's someone, a good man, someone who's been there through everything. And I think I might have feelings for him. Real ones. But I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I'm healed enough to risk caring about someone that way. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. He knew he should walk away, give her privacy. But he was rooted to the spot, unable to move. You tell me to go for it, she continued, a smile in her voice. You'd say life's too short to play it safe, that I've wasted enough time being afraid. She was quiet for a moment. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to take a chance on something good. When she stood and turned, she found Marcus standing closer than usual. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of words spoken and words unspoken. Marcus, Victoria, I think, she started, then stopped. No, I know. I care about you, as more than a friend, and I don't know what to do about that. Marcus took a step closer. I care about you too, have for a while now. But I didn't want to complicate things while you were healing. And now I think maybe you're strong enough to handle complications, if you want to. She closed the distance between them, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. I want to. God help me, I really want to. They kissed there, beside Vivian's grave, under the oak tree that had witnessed so much grief and healing. It was gentle and tentative, a promise of something beginning rather than something ending. When they finally pulled apart, she was crying and smiling at the same time. Do you think she'd approve? She asked, glancing at the headstone. I think she'd be throwing something at us for taking so long to figure it out. She laughed through her tears. Yeah, she probably would. They stood there for a few more minutes, hand in hand, saying nothing. Sometimes the most important moments don't need words. They just need witnesses. As they walked back to the car, she spoke again. This doesn't fix everything, you know. I'm still working through a lot. I still have bad days. This won't be easy. I know. But I've never walked away from something just because it was hard. I'm not starting now. Good, because neither am I. The year that followed brought changes none of them had anticipated. Marcus and Victoria dated cautiously at first, testing the waters of this new dynamic. They discovered they worked just as well as partners as they had as bodyguard and client. Maybe better. She continued to grow her foundation, and Marcus transitioned to consulting work that gave him more flexibility to support her. The Thursday cemetery visits continued, but now they went together as equals. Sometimes they brought flowers. Sometimes they just sat beneath the oak tree and talked. Marcus learned to address Vivian directly, sharing updates and asking for guidance in that half-serious, half-joking way that Victoria did. "Your sister thinks I'm good for you," Marcus told her one Thursday in late spring, 2 years after they'd first met. "She told me so in a dream last night." She laughed. "Oh, really? What else did she say?" "She said I'd better make an honest woman out of you before she haunts me from beyond the grave." Her laughter faded into surprise as Marcus knelt on the grass beside Vivian's headstone, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I know this isn't traditional," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "But Vivian is part of you, part of us. It felt right to do this here, with her." He opened the box, revealing a simple platinum ring with a single diamond. "Victoria Ashford, will you marry me?" Her hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." As Marcus slipped the ring on her finger, she looked at her sister's grave. "You were right, Viv. He's a good man, the best." She touched the headstone gently. "Thank you. For everything. For watching over me. For guiding me here. I love you. I'll always love you." The wedding was small, held in the garden of Richard Ashford's estate on a perfect September afternoon. The guest list included close family, Victoria's foundation staff, and the friends she'd made through her support groups. And in the front row, an empty chair with a single white lily placed on it, a seat reserved for Vivian. During her vows, she looked at that empty chair and smiled through her tears. "My sister once told me to stop playing it safe and just live. It took me a long time to understand what she meant, but I'm learning. Every day, I'm learning." Marcus wiped his own eyes as he promised to love and honor and protect Victoria, not as her bodyguard anymore, but as her partner, her equal, her home. When the minister pronounced them married, the guests erupted in applause. But she took a moment to look at that empty chair one last time, silently sharing this moment with the sister who couldn't be there to witness it in person, but whose presence was felt in every breath she took, every choice she made, every step forward she dared to take. Life continued. Marcus and Victoria bought a house in Brookline, halfway between the cemetery and downtown Boston. Her foundation expanded to 3 more cities. They talked about children someday, about building a family that would honor Vivian's memory by being open and honest about mental health struggles. Every Thursday, without fail, they visited Newton Cemetery. Sometimes they brought flowers, sometimes just themselves, always together. On a cold December morning, 3 years after Marcus had first seen that grave, they stood beneath the oak tree one more time. Snow was falling softly, covering the ground in white. Vivian's headstone wore a cap of fresh powder. She placed her lilies as always, but today she also had news to share. "Viv, I'm pregnant. Marcus and I are having a baby. I'm terrified and excited and so grateful." She paused. "We're going to tell her about you. About how brave you were, how bright, how full of life. We're going to make sure she knows her aunt." Marcus stood behind her, his arms around her, holding her as she cried happy tears. He looked at Vivian's grave and made a silent promise. "I'll take care of her. Your sister. My wife. I'll love her enough for both of us. I'll make sure she keeps living, keeps healing, keeps becoming the person you always knew she could be." The snow continued to fall, covering the cemetery in peaceful white. And as Marcus and Victoria walked back to their car, hand in hand, neither of them looked back. They didn't need to. Vivian would always be with them, in her strength, in her passion for helping others, in the way she'd learned to live again after losing everything. Some stories don't have happy endings, but some stories, the ones that matter most, have new beginnings. And that's what this was. A beginning built on the foundation of loss, strengthened by love, and guided by the memory of a sister who would never be forgotten. 8 months later, on a warm August afternoon, exactly 4 years since the night that changed everything, Victoria gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Marcus held his daughter for the first time in the hospital room, marveling at her tiny fingers, her dark hair, the way she gripped his thumb with surprising strength. Victoria watched them both, exhausted but radiant. "What should we name her?" Marcus asked softly. They'd discussed names for months, debating, considering, never quite settling. But Victoria had been waiting for this moment, for when she could look at her daughter and know. "Vivian," she said without hesitation. "Vivian Grace." Marcus looked at her, understanding flooding through him. This wasn't about replacing her sister. It was about honoring her, about keeping her name alive in a way that brought joy instead of pain. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything. Vivian deserves to be remembered not just at a grave, but in life, in laughter and first steps and bedtime stories. Our daughter can carry that name forward, make it mean hope instead of loss." The first Thursday, after bringing baby Vivian home, they made their regular trip to Newton Cemetery. Marcus carried the infant carrier while Victoria held her flowers. At the grave, Victoria knelt carefully, one hand resting on the carrier beside her. "Viv, I want you to meet someone. This is Vivian Grace Townsend, your namesake, your legacy." Baby Vivian chose that moment to make a small sound, almost like she was responding. Victoria laughed through tears. "I think she knows. Somehow, I think she knows her aunt is watching over her." Marcus stood witness to this sacred moment. 3 generations of Vivians connected across time and space. The one who was lost, the one who survived, and the one who represented their future. As they walked back to the car, baby Vivian sleeping peacefully, Victoria turned to Marcus. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me at my worst and staying anyway. For helping me believe I could have this, a family, a life, happiness. For loving me when I couldn't love myself. You did all the hard work. I just kept watch." "No." She stopped walking and looked at him intently. "You did more than that. You showed me that the grave wasn't the end of Vivian's story. That love doesn't stop just because someone's gone. That healing is possible even when it seems impossible." Marcus kissed her forehead gently. "Then we showed each other, because you taught me that some promises are worth keeping forever." They stood there in the afternoon sunshine, a small family of 3, surrounded by monuments to the past, but facing firmly toward the future. And somewhere, in the rustling oak leaves, in the warm breeze, in the peaceful silence of the old cemetery, perhaps Vivian smiled too, because her sister had finally learned what she'd been trying to teach her all along, to stop punishing herself for surviving, to embrace the messy beauty of being alive, and to understand that the best way to honor the dead is to live fully for them. The weekly Thursday visits continued, but now they brought baby Vivian with them. And as she grew from infant to toddler, she learned to place flowers on her aunt's grave, to blow kisses to the sky, to carry a name that meant both remembrance and renewal. On baby Vivian's 2nd birthday, as they celebrated in the garden with cake and balloons, Victoria stood at the window watching Marcus chase their daughter through the grass. Her father approached, standing beside her. "She would be so proud of you," Richard said quietly. "Both of them would. I know, Dad. And I'm finally starting to believe I deserve this. The happiness, the peace, all of it." Richard squeezed her shoulder. "You always did, sweetheart. You just needed time to see it." And that, ultimately, was the truth Victoria had learned from standing at that grave week after week for so many years. That forgiveness isn't something you find all at once. It's something you practice, slowly, imperfectly, one Thursday at a time. That guilt can coexist with joy. That grief can walk beside hope. That you can carry loss without letting it define you. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for those you've lost is to keep living. fully, bravely, with your whole heart. As the sun set over their garden that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Victoria made one last silent promise to her sister. I'm living, Viv, just like you told me to, and I'm teaching your namesake to do the same. What did you think? Did Victoria make the right choice in opening her heart again? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. How would you rate this story from 0 to 10? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional narratives like this one. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story, and check out our other videos by clicking on the end screen. Thank you for being here with us today. Years passed, like pages turning in a book. Little Vivian grew into a bright, curious 5-year-old with her mother's grey eyes and her father's quiet strength. And every Thursday, without exception, the three of them made their pilgrimage to Newton Cemetery. On one particular Thursday in early spring, something extraordinary happened. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom, their pink petals drifting like snow across the old headstones. Little Vivian clutched her small bouquet of white lilies. She always insisted on carrying her own flowers now, and ran ahead on the familiar path. When they reached the grave, she placed her lilies carefully beside her mother's larger arrangement. Then, in her clear, innocent voice, she did something she'd never done before. "Hi, Aunt Vivi," she said, patting the headstone with her small hand. "I learned to ride my bike without training wheels. Daddy says you would be proud." Victoria's breath caught. Marcus squeezed her hand as tears streamed down her face. Their daughter was talking to her aunt as naturally as if they were having tea together, as if death was just another form of distance, not an ending. "She is proud," Victoria managed to say, kneeling beside her daughter. "Your Aunt Vivian is always proud of you, sweetheart, always watching over you." "I know, Mommy. I feel her sometimes, like sunshine on my face." Little Vivian smiled, that simple, pure smile of childhood that knows no shadows. "She's happy we remember her." Marcus found himself unable to speak, overwhelmed by the perfection of this moment. A child who never knew her aunt, speaking to her with perfect faith. A mother who'd spent years drowning in guilt, now able to share this sacred space with her daughter without fear. A family built on the foundation of loss, but flowering into something beautiful. As they walked back to the car, little Vivian skipping between her parents, Victoria realized something profound. The grave had been her prison for so long, a place where she went to punish herself, to remember what she'd lost, to carry a burden no one else could see. But somewhere along the journey, it had transformed into something else entirely. It had become a bridge, a connection between past and present, between grief and healing, between the sister she'd lost and the family she'd found. Vivian's memory wasn't a weight anymore. It was a gift, a reminder that love survives everything, even death, even guilt, even the darkest nights of the soul. That evening, as Marcus tucked their daughter into bed, little Vivian asked a question that would stay with him forever. "Daddy, is Aunt Vivian Angel now?" Marcus thought carefully before answering. "I think she's something even better, sweetheart. I think she's a part of your mommy's heart. And now she's a part of yours too. That's stronger than any angel could ever be." "Good," little Vivian yawned, already drifting towards sleep. "I like having an angel in my heart. It makes me feel brave." Marcus kissed her forehead and left the room, his eyes burning with tears he hadn't expected. In the hallway, he found Victoria waiting, having heard every word. They held each other in the darkness, no words necessary. Later, as they lay in bed, Victoria spoke into the quiet. "Marcus, do you ever think about that first day, when you saw me at the grave and thought I was visiting my own death? Sometimes. It seems like a lifetime ago. In a way, I was visiting my own death. The death of who I used to be. The death of my innocence, my peace, my sister." She turned to face him in the darkness. "But I was also visiting a beginning. I just didn't know it yet. That grave became the place where I learned to live again. Where I learned that endings and beginnings aren't always separate things. And now? Now it's where our daughter learns that love doesn't end. That family is bigger than just the people you can touch. That memory is its own kind of presence. She smiled in the darkness. Vivian would love that. She'd love knowing her story didn't end with that headstone, that it continues in every Thursday visit, in every white lily, in every time our daughter says her name with pride instead of sadness. Marcus pulled her closer, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought them to this moment. She'd also probably tell us to stop being so philosophical and get some sleep. Her laughter was soft, intimate, completely at peace. Yeah, she probably would. As they drifted towards sleep, neither of them saw the way the moonlight filtered through their bedroom window, casting a gentle glow that seemed almost like a presence. Neither of them heard the faint whisper of wind that sounded almost like laughter, almost like approval, almost like a sister saying goodbye one last time, because goodbyes weren't necessary anymore, because Vivian Grace Ashford hadn't really died that terrible August night 4 years ago. She'd simply transformed, from flesh and blood into memory, from physical presence into spiritual legacy, from a life cut short into a story that would be told and retold through generations. And in the end, isn't that what immortality really is? Not living forever, but being loved beyond death. Not being remembered perfectly, but being remembered truly. Not escaping the grave, but transforming it from a place of ending into a place of continuing. Every Thursday morning, as Marcus drove his family to Newton Cemetery, he thought about all of this, about how a simple bodyguard assignment had become the greatest adventure of his life, about how protecting someone's physical safety had evolved into protecting something far more precious, her hope, her healing, her future. And every Thursday, as they placed fresh white lilies on that weathered grey headstone, little Vivian would ask the same question she always asked. Can we stay a little longer? I want to tell Aunt Vivi more stories. And they always did. Because some things are worth protecting. Some promises are worth keeping. And some love stories don't end with a grave. They begin there, flowering into something more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. That's what Victoria finally understood, standing there week after week beside the man who'd shown her how to live again, and the daughter who carried her sister's name into the future. The grave wasn't Victoria's punishment. It was Vivian's gift. A sacred space where healing could happen, where love could grow, where endings could transform into beginnings. And on those quiet Thursday mornings in Newton Cemetery, with cherry blossoms falling like blessings and a 5-year-old's laughter echoing between the ancient headstones, it was almost possible to believe that Vivian was there too, smiling, approving, grateful. Because in the end, her sister had finally learned the lesson Vivian had been trying to teach her all along. That living fully isn't about forgetting the dead. It's about remembering them so completely, so perfectly, so lovingly, that they become part of every breath you take, every choice you make, every moment you dare to be happy, despite the pain. That's not just survival, that's victory. That's grace. That's love, transcending death itself. And that's what happens when you visit your sister's grave every Thursday for years. Not to punish yourself, but to remember who she was and who she helped you become.